Good evening. I'm glad you're here. Now it doesn't matter what time it is or what happened in your day. For a few minutes, you can leave everything outside. Today, you're going to hear an ancient story full of monsters, gods, and difficult choices, but you don't have to watch it. Just listening is more than enough. You can put your cell phone aside, face down, maybe turn off the light, or turn on a soft fan. None of this is mandatory, but it helps. Here, you don't have to do anything. Just breathe, relax, and let yourself go. Today's title is Would You Survive Medusa? The Myth of Perseus. A strange question, perhaps, but don't worry. No one is going to ask you to fight monsters now. I just want to tell you a story. And if, at some point, you feel that it's doing you good, that your mind has become lighter, or that sleep is slowly coming, then yes, if you want, consider subscribing to the channel here. Only if you like what you find here. No pressure. Now, imagine an ancient world. White stones, broken temples, bored gods looking down on humans. A place where everything is judgment, where every mistake can turn into eternal punishment, where beauty is both a blessing and a curse. And in the middle of it all, a boy. A hero who doesn't even know he's a hero yet, who was born from a trick, was raised in hiding, and is now about to be sent to his death, Perseus. You will follow in his footsteps. You will feel the weight of the shield, the fear of looking at what cannot be seen, and the silence of choices with no turning back. Because before Medusa, there was a tower, there was a locked mother, a god who turned into rain to reach her. There was a baby thrown into the sea, and a cowardly king pretending to be generous. This story is not just about cutting off heads. It's about what we do when the world demands that we face something we don't understand, when being brave means obeying or pretending to have control. Medusa, perhaps, wasn't even the monster in the story. Maybe she was just tired of being looked at, of being feared, of being guilty of existing, but that we'll figure it out little by little. The important thing now is for you to slow down, breathe deeper, allow your mind to begin to darken along with the night. You don't need to pay attention to everything. In fact, it's best if you don't try to understand too much. Just follow the voice. Imagine, feel, let sleep come when it wants. And if it doesn't come now, that's okay too. The story will continue, slowly, calmly, until the end. And even if you fall asleep halfway through, the story will accompany you, like an ancient whispers crossing time. Now, are you ready? The journey begins. Close your eyes, if you want. Let's go back to the Greece that whispers, where monsters sleep in cold caves, and heroes don't always return whole, where looking can be deadly, and where you, just for today, can simply listen. At the edge of the ancient world, beneath a sky that seemed to watch in silence, there was a land made of stone, dust, and expectation. The Greece of myth was not just a place. It was a state of constant alertness. The wind blew between the broken columns of the temples, carrying not only the sound of the sea but also the murmur of the gods. In this land, every step carried weight, every word could bring punishment, and every gesture was interpreted as a sign. People lived under the invisible surveillance of immortal beings who were quick to offend and quick to help, often in exchange for something. No one was truly free, not even kings. Life there was short but intense. Glory was more desired than peace. Dying young could be honorable if it was in combat or in the name of the gods. Living long was a sign of luck or of oblivion. Men learned from an early age to appear strong. Women, by keeping quiet. The gods did not reward truth, they rewarded spectacle. And often, they punished chance as if it were choice. It was in this scenario that a story emerged, not of conquest, but of attempt. Perseus did not yet exist, but the seed of his legend was already beginning to sprout from the fear of another man. Acrisius, king of Argos, heard a prophecy. One day, he would be killed by his own grandson. He did not laugh. He did not question. He only felt the typical terror of someone who believes in oracles. He decided to prevent the future. He did what many men in power do when they are terrified. He locked away what he could not control. Danae, his daughter, was imprisoned in a tower. There were no doors, only narrow openings in the ceiling. No man would enter there. No grandchildren would be born. That was what Acrisius thought. But gods do not follow logic, and Zeus, always attentive to what seems beautiful or interesting to him, looked at that prison and saw no limits. He turned himself into rain, a golden rain that ran through the cracks and fell on Danae. The result was immediate. She became pregnant. When Acrisius found out, he didn't believe it. Then he believed it too much. The fear returned, but he didn't want to carry the burden of infanticide. He chose another path. He placed Danae and the newborn baby inside a wooden chest, sealed the box, and threw them both into the sea. A cruel gesture disguised as neutrality. Technically, he didn't kill anyone. He just handed over their fate to the ocean. The sea accepted them. Rough, salty, dark, it carried mother and son for days, perhaps weeks. No one knows for sure, but they survived. The ark floated until it reached the island of Seriphos, where a fisherman named Dictys found the two and decided to take them in. He was a simple man. He did not seek power. He simply followed his instinct to protect. He raised Perseus as his son. Meanwhile, the world had not changed. It continued to be controlled by fear, by honor, by the moods of the gods. But something had begun to move. A new piece had entered the board. Perseus did not know what awaited him, and no one knew that that baby thrown into the sea would one day cut off the head of a monster to survive a lie. In ancient Greece, stories began like this, without fanfare, without any major revelations, just an act of desperation, a divine intervention, and a survivor. Perseus was still an unknown name, but his birth was the first step in a series of mistakes, fears, and favors that would change everything. Around him, the world moved on. Ships anchored, gods whispered to each other, and humans continued to try to decipher signals. Perseus grew up in a quiet corner of history, unaware that silence can also hide monsters, and that monsters don't always have fangs or scales. Sometimes they wear crowns. Perseus grew up among fishing nets, salt in the air, and whispered stories at dusk. He knew no castles, no thrones, no temples. He knew the sound of the sea breaking on the rocks, the smell of wet firewood, the taste of the simple food cooked by his mother. Danae spoke little of the past, not out of forgetfulness, but out of protection. Her pain was something kept hidden, compact, silent, as if telling what had happened would bring fear back to life. Perseus, therefore, grew up without knowing that he was the son of Zeus and the grandson of a king who tried to kill him. Dictys, the fisherman who took them in, was a quiet but fair man. He taught Perseus to row, to cast nets, and to respect the sea and its whims. He treated the boy firmly, but not harshly. He was not a father, nor did he want to be, but he was a presence, and that, for Perseus, was enough. The days were repetitive, but safe. At night, Perseus looked at the stars, not knowing that one day he would be remembered among them. On the island of Seriphos, everything was small, the houses, the ambitions, the dreams. But there was a king, Polydectes, Dictys' brother, a vain man, always surrounded by flatterers. He disguised his greed with theatrical generosity. He liked to throw parties, give gifts, hear compliments. But what he really wanted was Danae. Years passed, and the boy became a young man. Perseus was now strong, fast, and respected on the island, and that was exactly what bothered the king. Polydectes knew he could not take Danae by force. Perseus was always nearby, alert. Protecting his mother was his job, even though he did not understand the magnitude of the danger. The king then decided to use another method. He pretended to fall in love with another woman. He said he was going to get married. He invited all the men on the island to the ceremony. Each one had to bring a gift: gold, horses, weapons. Perseus, who had no possessions, was the target of mockery, and trying to show courage, he made a mistake. He said he would bring anything the king asked for. Polydectes smiled. He didn't ask for gold nor jewels. He asked for Medusa's head. Silence. No one laughed. It was an absurd request. Deadly. The Gorgons were feared creatures. 3 monstrous sisters with snakes for hair. Medusa was the only mortal among them, and the most feared. It was said that whoever looked into her eyes would turn to stone. No one had returned from there. Polydectes knew that. Perseus did not back down, perhaps out of pride, perhaps out of fear of appearing weak, perhaps because he still did not understand how much his life was worth. He accepted the challenge. He said he would bring back Medusa's head. The men laughed nervously, and the king made sure to spread the news throughout the entire island. Danae remained silent. She made no attempt to stop him. She just looked at her son, as if she knew he would not return the same. Perseus, left with little more than hope. He had no map, no plan, only the creature's name and the echo of the promise. The first few days were empty. He walked along unfamiliar roads, asking about legends. Many laughed at him. Others kept quiet. Until, one moonless night, something changed. A golden glow cut across the sky, and 2 figures appeared on the side of the road. Hermes and Athena. 2 gods, each with their own way of speaking, their own posture. Hermes smiled. Athena watched. They offered help, not out of kindness, but because Medusa was also part of their story. They gave Perseus 3 items: winged sandals, a helmet that made him invisible, and a shield that reflected like a mirror. The young man accepted. He asked no questions. Maybe because he was tired. Maybe because, at that moment, he just wanted to survive what he had promised. With the items in hand, Perseus set out, but the road was still long. He needed to find the Graeae, 3 ancient women who shared a single eye. They knew where the Gorgon's lair was, but they did not share information easily. And the next step would require more than courage. It would require cunning. As he moved forward, Perseus did not think of glory. He thought of his mother. He thought of the sea of Seriphos, the wood of Dictys's ship, the life he left behind because of a miscalculated phrase, an impossible gift, a deceitful king. Perseus was not yet a hero, but now he had no choice. Perseus did not choose to be born, nor did he choose to survive. He was thrown into the world as a consequence of a king's fear and a god's whim. He grew up far from everything that destiny had in store for him, far from the halls of Argos, far from his grandfather's gaze, far from the intrigues that marked his origins. He grew up with his feet in the sand, his skin tanned by the sun, his ears accustomed to the constant sound of the waves. Perseus's childhood was simple, but not innocent. Danae was no ordinary woman. She carried a thin, constant shadow in her eyes. She knew that peace was temporary, that the silence could be broken at any moment. He never spoke in detail about Argos. He never mentioned his father's name, but her care said it all. Perseus learned early to observe, to recognize tension in other people's shoulders, to spot danger before it arose. Dictys, the fisherman, was his most constant figure. a man of few words and many gestures. He taught Perseus to fish, row, mend nets, and watch the wind. He did not treat him like a son, nor did he demand gratitude. He simply included him in his daily life with a naturalness that, for the boy, was more comforting than any declaration. Seriphos was a forgotten island. Few people arrived, and even fewer left. But even there, rumors traveled. Rumors about Danae and her son fueled the curiosity of the neighbors. Some believed the boy was the result of violence. Others believed it was a miracle, and there were those who whispered that Zeus had descended from the sky, disguised as light. Danae neither confirmed nor denied this. She simply lived. Perseus felt that he was not like the other boys, not because of vanity, but because of discomfort. There was something about him that didn't fit in, a kind of restlessness that grew over time. He had strength in his arms and courage in his eyes, but he carried a kind of loneliness that was hard to explain. Even when surrounded by people, there was always a piece of him that was distant. As the years passed, Perseus became known on the island, not only for his strength, but for his seriousness. He avoided trouble, but did not run away from it. He protected his mother firmly, and behind his calm gaze, there was an instinct ready to react. Polydectes, the king of the island, was watching everything. He pretended to be kind, but kept Danae at the center of his interest. Perseus noticed the looks. He did not trust the king, but he still did not know how to confront him. And it was precisely this hesitation that Polydectes exploited. He waited for the right moment to set a trap. The fake marriage proposal was a planned scam. The request for Medusa's head was a veiled promise. Polydectes knew Perseus would accept, not out of loyalty, but out of honor, out of impulse, out of pride. The young man accepted the challenge, unaware that in doing so, he had entered an ancient game, where the board was invisible and the rules changed all the time. That night, before he left, Perseus sat by the sea. Danae appeared silently. She sat beside him. There was no speech, just a long look, as if saying everything that would not be said out loud. Perseus promised to return, but he did not know if he believed it. The next day, he set out. He took little with him, a simple cloak, a knife, no map, no certainty. He walked as if he had no alternative. He knew that if he failed, there would be no mercy. Polydectes was not just an ambitious king. He was a man who hid behind smiles, who manipulated with delicacy. During the journey, Perseus thought about his childhood, about the smell of wet wood from the ships, about Dictys's short advice, about his mother's silence, about everything that had shaped who he was. Even without him realizing it, the simplicity of life on Seriphos now seemed distant and, at the same time, more valuable than ever. That childhood, marked by fear disguised as routine, had given him more than strength. It had given him attention. Perseus noticed the world around him. He felt the signs in the wind. He sensed changes. This would keep him alive more than once. On the journey ahead, he would encounter monsters of flesh, of stone, of soul, but none would be as difficult as the first, the fear of not being enough. Polydectes was a man who liked to appear larger than he was. His gestures were always broad, his words carefully chosen, his smiles extended as far as his disguise would reach. He governed Seriphos as if he owned the truth, but without the courage, someone who leads with firmness. He preferred the backstage, the subtle game of manipulation. He never shouted. He never imposed forcefully. He acted as if he were giving gifts, but always demanded payment later. Danae, for him, was not just a beautiful woman. She was a symbol of conquest, desire mixed with vanity. She refused firmly, but without confrontation. She did not give in. nor did she react violently. She simply kept her distance, and that, for Polydectes, was intolerable. No one contradicted him like that without consequences. Perseus was the obstacle. The young man had grown up under the king's watchful eye, strong, respected, silent. He did not flaunt his origins, nor did he demand anything, but he was firm, present. He was the kind of son who made people proud, but who also inspired fear. Polydectes realized this. He knew he could not act directly, so he waited. The occasion came with the perfect excuse: a wedding, a sudden announcement that he would take a noble wife from far away. He organized a celebration, summoned all the men of the island, and announced an ancient custom. Each guest was to bring a gift. Perseus had no gold, no horses. He had only words, and it was with words that he fell into the trap. He said he would give anything, any gift, whatever the king asked for. Polydectes did not hesitate. He asked for Medusa's head, an absurd request, a sentence disguised as a joke. Everyone laughed, but no one believed he was serious, except Perseus. He did not know how to back down, not out of stubbornness, but out of a sense of duty. He accepted, without hesitation. Polydectes' malice lay precisely there. He didn't need to raise his hand. He simply created the conditions for the other to fall. He was a master of a mission, an expert in shaping situations that seemed spontaneous. He knew that Perseus would not be able to refuse without appearing cowardly. He knew that no one expected the young man to return alive. Deep down, Polydectes didn't want the head of a monster. He wanted Danae out of the way. He wanted Perseus gone, and if possible, dead. With her son out of the picture, the mother would be vulnerable. It was an ancient ploy, disguised as a heroic challenge, a quiet use of power. That same night, after the announcement, Danae sought out her son. She didn't ask him to stay. She didn't say he was crazy. She simply looked at him with the contained pain of someone who has lost before. Perseus, on the other hand, was unmoved, not out of courage, but because he didn't know how to go back. It was too late. The promise had been made. The people of the island whispered. Some said the king had been too generous. Others thought Perseus was arrogant for accepting the challenge. But no one helped him. Everyone hoped he would disappear, and order would be restored. It was more comfortable to silently cheer than to act. And so, Perseus set out, without an army, without allies, without a clear destination. He carried on his shoulders not only the mission, but the weight of a trap. In his head, the king's smile still echoed, a smile that he now understood better. Polydectes' malice was subtle, almost elegant, but no less cruel. It was the kind of poison that leaves no visible marks, that kills slowly using the victim's own choices. Perseus had no way back. He could not give up. He was trapped in an impossible mission, created not by a mythical enemy, but by an ordinary man. And perhaps that was the most dangerous part. The legendary monsters, at least, showed their teeth. As for the small men, they hid their hooks inside gentle gestures. Perseus walked without a map. He didn't know where Medusa was. He didn't even know what she looked like, beyond the rumors. All he had was a promise spoken too loudly, in front of men who expected his downfall. The king smiled as he left. Danae didn't cry. Dictys remained silent. As always, their silence said more than any goodbye. The mission made no practical sense. It was impossible, by definition. Search for the head of a creature that turned men to stone with a glance. A creature that lived far away, in nowhere, protected by immortal sisters. No known hero had returned from there. Perhaps none had even tried. Perseus knew this. Still, he walked, not for faith, nor for glory, but because to return with nothing was to die in a different way. To return empty-handed would be to hand over his mother to the king. Perseus did not see himself as a savior, nor as brave, just someone who had no choice. The path took him through small villages, dry mountains, and quiet forests. The faces of those I passed were similar: skeptical, distracted, tired. No one believed he could do it. Many didn't even know what a Gorgon was. Others laughed and said that Medusa was already dead, or that she was just a myth. He listened to everything and followed. At night, he slept wherever he could, sometimes in a stable, sometimes out in the open. The sky was his roof, and his thoughts were his only companions. He didn't talk much, not even to himself. Fear, instead of screaming, settled silently, like dust on his shoulders. The mission wasn't just difficult, it was inhumane and designed to fail. That was clear. Polydectes didn't want results. He wanted distance. Perseus was only beginning to understand that now. With each step, the trap became clearer, but it was too late. Even tired, even without direction, he did not stop. Obstinacy was his only armor. He had no divine strength, nor special weapons. He carried an ordinary dagger and a worn cloak. His body resisted out of habit, his heart out of impulse. It was on one of those lonely nights on a forgotten road that something changed. The sky grew darker than usual. A thick silence fell. And then, as if arriving unbidden, two figures materialized: Hermes and Athena. They didn't announce themselves. They were just there. Hermes, light, with wings on his feet and an almost amused smile. Athena, firm, with eyes that seemed to pierce through stone. Neither of them explained why they had come. Neither asked permission. They just observed the boy, as if evaluating a tool. Hermes gave him the winged sandals. With them, Perseus could fly, escape, if necessary. Athena offered him the shield. Polished like a mirror, it would serve not only for defense, but for looking without looking. A third gift would come later, but that, they said, would depend on him. Perseus didn't ask any questions. He took the items reverently, but without surprise, as if he had known something like this would happen. Maybe, deep down, he expected the gods to intervene. Or maybe he was just relieved that he wasn't completely alone. The presence of the gods did not ease the burden, quite the contrary. It brought another layer of tension. If they helped, it was because there was something bigger at stake. Perseus was not chosen. He was useful. The mission now seemed possible. But the risk remained. The gods gave no guarantees, only tools. The journey continued. The next step was to find the Graeae, three ancient pale sisters, with a single eye between them. They held the secret he needed, the whereabouts of Medusa, but the Graeae did not speak willingly, and Perseus would have to get what he wanted, with more than talk. The mission was taking shape. Now, it was not just about surviving. It was about winning a game of deception. He walked, flew, stopped, hid. There was no clear path, no logic. The mission was vague, a wisp of smoke. But he did not retreat. The fear was there, but he did not command. Now, Perseus was not just the boy from the island. He was someone who carried weapons borrowed from the gods, who walked in silence so as not to attract the attention of monsters, and who, little by little, became what everyone said he would never be. Perseus walked in silence. The world around him seemed wider with every step. The mountains grew taller, the paths became less certain. He no longer looked for shortcuts. He knew they didn't exist. What he was looking for was not a place. It was a secret, hidden in the margins of legend. The name Medusa whispered in the corners of his memory, as if it were already part of something inevitable. He carried with him the gifts of the gods. Hermes' sandals gave lightness to his feet. They would allow him to escape, to cross distances to climb where his body could not reach. But Perseus still walked. Flying seemed too bold, as if it were not yet his. Athena's shield shone even in the dim light, a cold, clean shine that reflected no vanity. It reflected precision. Perseus understood the value of the object. With it, he could see what could not be looked at directly, the monster that turns you to stone with its gaze. But the shield was still tucked away. It was early. The gods had given them tools, but no promises. There were no guarantees, no generous advice. Hermes seemed kind, but laughed more than he spoke. Athena was clear, but distant. They did not touch the ground. They just watched. Perseus accepted them as temporary allies. He did not trust them completely, but he did not refuse help either. The presence of the gods did not bring peace. It brought responsibility. Now he knew he was being watched, that the journey was no longer just personal. Mythology had swallowed up his story, and the mission, once suicidal, was now part of something bigger. The name Medusa was not just a destiny, it was a symbol, and symbols interested the gods. Perseus, without asking, had become an instrument, and the further I went, the more I realized that would not change. Still, he would not turn away. He had accepted the mission out of pride. Now he walked out of necessity. He had to finish what he had started. If he failed, his mother would pay the price. Polydectes would not back down, and he would not return in time to stop it. The nights grew colder. The terrain changed. Dark rocks, twisted trees, lakes that seemed too still. The world around them began to seem less human, as if it were approaching an invisible border, a limit between the natural and the forgotten. It was at this point that he knew it was time to seek out the Grey, the three old women who lived in isolation, sharing a single eye, guardians of ancient secrets, of forgotten maps, of information that no one else had the courage to seek. Getting to them wasn't the problem, finding them was. They wandered among shadows and mists, hidden not out of fear, but out of habit. Perseus walked for days, sleeping little, eating less. The gods didn't return. Their help was rare, surgical. Now he was on his own. When she finally found her sisters, it was like stepping into another time. The three of them took turns watching. One held her eye, while the others waited. Their speech was slow, their tone grave, as if they had been talking forever, as if they were tired of even existing. Perseus didn't explain anything. He didn't beg. He waited for the right moment, when one passed the eye to the other. And then, quickly, he took the object. The three screamed, tried to grope, but they couldn't get anywhere without the eye. He didn't hurt them. He just demanded information. Where was Medusa? The Grey gave in, not out of fear, but out of resignation. They showed the way. They showed the final gifts, the invisibility cloak, and the magic bag, items kept by nymphs. Without them, the mission was still impossible. Perseus returned the eye. He didn't thank them, but he didn't brag either. He knew that in that world, nothing was free. With the helmet, Perseus could disappear. With the bag, he could carry what no one should touch. And now, with all the instruments gathered together, he was, for the first time, an armed hero. But he was not yet victorious. The challenge still lay ahead. The intervention of the gods was over. They had done what they thought was enough. Now, it was up to him. Perseus, alone, with divine gifts on his shoulders and the weight of his own name on his back, kept walking. Each step took him deeper into the land of legend. The Grey did not see the world clearly. They shared a single eye among themselves, passed from hand to hand like any other object, but that did not make them blind. They knew much more than they said. They carried ancient information, fragmented memories, and a patience that only long time teaches. 3 fragile figures at first glance, but whose gestures bore the memory of millennia spent watching other people's destinies repeat themselves. Perseus did not feel afraid of them. He felt discomfort, as if he were facing something he should not see. When he took the eye, he did not hesitate. He made the move quick, precise. This was his chance. They screamed, struggled, cursed, but they had no way to reach him. Without the eye, they could see nothing. He did not threaten them. He only demanded. He needed the location of Medusa, the exact path, and the way to survive the journey. They gave in, not because they were scared, but because they knew that fighting would be useless. They told him about the nymphs who guarded what was left to make the mission possible. 3 objects: Hades' helmet, capable of making him invisible, an enchanted bag made to hold anything, even a damn head, and the location of the lair where the Gorgons slept. They gave it all away, with dry words, as if secrets were no longer valuable. Perseus listened, without interrupting. He memorized every detail. He didn't say thank you. He knew that gratitude would go to waste. They didn't expect it either. They simply took the eye back and went back to their routine without rushing, as if nothing had happened. He left without looking back. He knew that those women existed outside of time, that they would once again observe the world in the same way as always, with boredom and precision. The next encounter was with the nymphs, discreet creatures, almost invisible to the common sight, guardians of divine objects, but without vanity. They offered what he needed with a strange calm. No tests, no bargaining, as if they already knew he would arrive. He received the helmet, black, smooth, discreet. With it, he could go unnoticed even by supernatural eyes. The bag, made of fabric that didn't look like fabric, malleable but indestructible, ideal for containing what cannot be touched. Now he was ready. Every piece of the puzzle was in his hands: the sandals, the shield, the helmet, the bag. The gods had given them all, but none of them walked beside him. The weight was his alone. The landscape changed as he advanced. Sparse trees, black rocks, profound silence. It was as if the world around him held its breath. He was approaching the end of the road. The Gorgons lived in a place far from everything, a blind spot in the world where the sun seemed to hesitate to rise. Their lair was a cave surrounded by statues, some broken, others still whole, none made by human hands. They were petrified men, warriors, hunters, thieves, all who had tried the same before him. Perseus did not speak. He just watched. Fear came, but it did not command. He remembered Athena's instructions. Do not look directly. Use the shield as a mirror. Walk slowly. The entrance was narrow. The darkness was almost solid. Inside, 3 sleeping figures. The Gorgons, sisters, with twisted faces, hair that moved like snakes, slow but menacing breathing. Medusa was among them, the only mortal, the only one who could be defeated. Perseus approached. Without making a sound, he slipped between the shadows. Covered by his helmet, his shield pointed at the ground, slightly tilted to capture images without risking his eyes. He found the face. He recognized it, even though he had never seen it before. There was a strange beauty there, even if it was deformed. A sadness, too, as if the creature had not chosen what it had become. He did not hesitate. He raised his sword, guided by the reflected image. A single blow, quick, precise, and then silence. The body fell, blood gushed, and from the severed neck, 2 beings were born: Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a golden warrior. Perseus did not think. He picked up the head carefully. Without looking, he put it in his bag. The helmet made him invisible. The sisters screamed, but they could not see him. He ran, flying between the rocks, disappearing into the mist. He didn't feel victory. He felt relief and tiredness. The mission wasn't over yet, but he had done the impossible part. Perseus flew low. Hermes' sandals cut silently through the wind. Medusa's head, tucked away in his enchanted bag, weighed less than what he felt inside. There was no glory, no celebration. There was only urgency. The danger was not over yet. Behind him, Medusa's sisters screamed. They were awake, furious, searching for something they could not see. Hades' helmet kept Perseus invisible, but he knew that protection wouldn't last forever. Not against creatures that sensed the world by instinct, that hunted by the vibration of the air, by the scent of fear. Each wing beat took him further from the lair, but the tension remained. The crossing was still a long one. The world around them seemed different. The rocks were darker, the trees were more twisted. Nature seemed strangely still, as if even it was mourning the fallen creature. It wasn't just a way back. It was a path that crossed the territory of monsters. A region where human logic doesn't apply, where the day is slow to rise, and the night never quite says goodbye. Perseus did not fly in a straight line. He changed direction, dodged rocky peaks, avoided clearings. He knew that in this world, to be seen was to be hunted. Medusa's head could serve as a weapon, but also as a beacon. It attracted attention, even when hidden. The forest he crossed smelled of iron and wet roots. The branches, too low, seemed to touch the shoulders of anyone who passed by. The sounds were distant, a rustle of leaves, a footstep that wasn't his. There was no certainty that he was alone. One night, he found a clearing where he could rest, but he didn't sleep. He stayed leaning against a tree, his eyes open. There was something in the air, something that could not be named. It was not an outright threat. It was just a presence, as if something ancient there still watched the world pass by, waiting. Perseus's body ached. His hands were tense. His shield no longer shone as brightly as before. It was marked, scratched. His sword hung at his waist, stained with dried blood. Nothing about him seemed heroic at that moment. He was just an exhausted young man trying to get home. The following days went by faster, fewer obstacles, more open skies, but the tension didn't ease. He knew he had crossed an invisible line, that he was now part of the stories that scared children, that he was a man who carried a secret that was too dangerous. With each village I flew over, I avoided contact. My head in my bag was a danger. One careless glance could be fatal. I was beginning to realize the weight of carrying a power that could not be used without consequences. Memories of the lair came back in flashes. The image of Medusa, even when seen indirectly, would not leave his mind. There was no laughter, no relief, only the memory of a blow and everything that had arisen from it. Pegasus, the winged horse, had disappeared into the sky as soon as he appeared. Chrysaor, the golden warrior, had vanished into the same mist. Nothing made sense, and maybe that was the point. Mythology doesn't have to follow logic, it just has to survive the test of time. And now Perseus was part of it, even if he didn't want to be. He kept flying. His sandals showed no signs of fatigue, but his muscles did. The human world was closer, but he still felt distant, as if he were a different creature from the one who had left Seriphos weeks ago. The crossing was more than geographical, it was internal. The fear had a different tone now. It was not of failure, it was of return. How to look at her mother, how to explain what she had experienced, how to carry what she had seen, what she had done, what she had lost. There were no monsters before him, but the world was still full of them, some with crowns, others with easy smiles. Polydectes was still waiting for him. The promise still stood. Perseus adjusted his helmet. He put his feet firmly in his sandals, and he followed. Long before the sword touched his neck, Perseus had already felt Medusa's presence. It wasn't a sound, nor a smell. It was a weight in the air, a silence that seemed to hold time. The world around the lair was not like the others. The stones seemed to stare. The trees, twisted at impossible angles, seemed to be running from something. There were statues scattered all over the field, but they were different, expressions frozen in fear, arms raised in a last gesture of defense. No sculptor's signature, no pedestals. These were men who tried. Warriors, heroes, curious. Everyone turned to stone, with no chance of regret. Perseus paused before crossing the cave entrance. Athena's shield was in his hand, tilted slightly to catch the reflection of what lay within. Hades' helmet covered it, making it invisible to the common eye. But Medusa was no ordinary threat. Inside, 3 sisters slept, the Gorgons, and among them, the only mortal, the only one who could bleed. Medusa. They said she had once been beautiful, that she had provoked envy in gods and desire in men. They also said she had been punished for something she had not caused. A woman transformed into a monster to serve as a warning. Perseus did not know which was true, but he felt that there was sadness in that name. He advanced carefully. The shield showed fragmented images, hair that moved on its own, deep breathing, scales scattered on the ground. The other sisters were there, but not awake. They slept as if resting between battles. He had no interest in them. He found her face. Medusa was sleeping on her side, like any mortal. Her eyes were closed. The serpents were entwined, as if they were also dreaming. There was beauty there, even under the curse. There was something human. Perseus hesitated for a moment, not out of fear, but out of discomfort. He was about to kill something that was not attacking him, but there was no choice. He knew it. He could not go back without fulfilling his promise. He could not leave his mother in Polydectes' hands. He could not fail. He raised his sword. He did not look directly. He was guided only by reflex. A single blow. Quick, precise. The head separated from the body. A muffled sound echoed. The snakes fell silent. From the severed neck, 2 beings were born. Pegasus, the winged horse, leapt out of the body as if he were already ready. He shone in the dim light. He didn't look at Perseus. He just flew away, disappearing into the sky. Chrysaor, the golden warrior, appeared next. As quickly as Pegasus, he also disappeared. Perseus didn't try to understand. Mythology doesn't explain it. It just happens. Medusa was dead. Her blood was still flowing, but the danger was not over. The sisters woke at the sound. Roars echoed. Heavy movements. The other Gorgons opened their eyes, but they saw no one. Hades' helmet still protected Perseus. He acted without hesitation. He picked up the head carefully. Avoiding looking, he put it in his enchanted bag, and he fled. Not flying high, but low to the ground, invisible, silent, swift. The Gorgons screamed after him, but they did not know where to go. They struck the air, destroyed the walls of the cave, turned statues into ruins. Perseus did not look back. He crossed the field again, avoiding the petrified bodies, the open eyes, and eternally trapped in the last second of consciousness. When he finally got far enough away, he stopped on a high cliff. He took off his helmet. He took a breath. His whole body was shaking, but not from fear, from exhaustion. Medusa's head was secure. Mission impossible, accomplished. But there was no pride, no cry of victory, no sense of grandeur, only emptiness. Perseus had defeated a monster, but everything around him said this was no celebration. It was mourning. He realized that to kill Medusa, he had to act as many had done with her, by surprise, without warning, without dialogue, only force. Perseus was not the same as he had left Seriphos. His gaze was heavier now, His body was slower, his silence was deeper, and the story was far from over. Perseus stood tall on the rock, the wind stirring the dirty cloak he had worn since the beginning of his journey. The bag, fastened tightly to his side, now held something more dangerous than any weapon. Medusa's head still dripped a thick liquid, which was no ordinary blood. It carried a living power, a gaze that continued to be active, even without eyes to see. There were no more screams in the distance. Medusa's sisters had retreated, or perhaps given up. The creature they had lost was not just a sister, it was a part of them, the only one who could die, and she died. Perseus did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply looked at the horizon. What others would call a victory was, to him, a silent relief. His body could still smell the lair, the dust of the broken statues, the heat of freshly spilled blood. Every detail was imprinted on his skin like a fresh memory. He resumed his flight. His sandals obeyed effortlessly. His body, on the other hand, was beginning to show signs of wear. His hands tingled, his eyes were dry, his mind was dulled by so many disconnected images. But the mission was not yet complete. The return journey would demand more of him. With the enchanted bag strapped to his side, Perseus knew he carried something that could not be shown, nor described. It was a secret in the form of a weapon, a power so absolute it could not be used lightly, a gaze that petrified, a punishment that lasted forever. He didn't know yet how he would use it. He only knew that he needed to protect it, that it couldn't fall into the wrong hands. During the flight, he remembered the words he had heard before he left, the faces on Seriphos, Danae's silence, Polydectes' disguised laughter. It all seemed distant now, as if it belonged to another life. Halfway there, he landed on a deserted beach. He needed rest. His body was complaining. He found shelter under a sloping rock and remained there, quiet, staring out at the sea. Medusa's head made no sound, but her presence filled the space. It was like a second breath. Perseus's mind was swimming between confusing images, memories of his childhood, of the sea of Seriphos, of the day he accepted the mission. He wondered what would have happened if he had said no, if he had kept quiet. But this thought led nowhere. The past was already shaped. There, in that solitary pause, he understood what had changed. The fear he had felt at the beginning was still there, but now it was a different kind. No longer afraid of failing, but of carrying what he had achieved. Glory seemed like a distant word. That wasn't what he felt. What filled him was something rawer, denser, the sense of having survived. The moment between fear and glory, he discovered, is made of silence, of weariness, of doubts that no one can answer. The songs of heroes speak of victory, but they do not tell of what happens afterwards, of the moments when one is alone, with one's thoughts going round in circle. When he finally resumed his flight, night was already approaching. The sky was slowly darkening. The stars were beginning to appear. Perseus climbed slowly, avoiding cities, dodging lights. Hades' helmet was kept for now. Invisibility no longer seemed necessary. On the horizon, he knew that Seriphos was waiting for him, and with her, Polydectes, the man who caused it all, the king who did not lift a sword, but devised the most precise trap. The thought of returning was strange. The island he had left was no longer the same. Neither was he. Perseus now brought something that no other brought, the head of Medusa, proof that he had overcome the impossible. But it also brought up something else, a doubt whether all of this was really necessary. The flight was calm, but what would come next, he still couldn't imagine. Seriphos appeared on the horizon like a distant memory. The silhouette of the island was the same, but Perseus saw it differently. Now, with the weight of the journey on his shoulders, everything seemed smaller. The mountains were less tall, the sea less vast. The time he had spent away from there had changed him. He was no longer the boy who had left in a hurry, and with promises. He was another man, more dense, more silent. His return was unannounced. There were no crowds, no celebrations, no heralds to announce his arrival. Perseus landed discreetly, hidden by the night and Hades' helmet. The wind blew as usual. The houses remained in the same place. The smell of salt and fish still filled the air, but something had changed. He walked through the narrow streets. He observed the closed doors, the silent alleys. No one recognized him. Invisible, he crossed the island in silence. Like a ghost returned from the sea, he knew exactly where to go. Before confronting Polydectes, he wanted to see his mother. He found Danae in the same simple house where they had lived. But now, there was tension there. Her eyes were deeper, her gestures more restrained. It was no surprise. While he was away, Polydectes had tightened the siege. With his son absent, the king felt free to press. Danae resisted as best she could, but she was tired. Perseus took off his helmet only when he was alone with her. Their reunion was without tears, nor any big words. It was a silent, prolonged embrace. Two exhausted bodies trying to recognize each other. She didn't ask what happened. He didn't explain. They were simply together again. But there was a task to be done. Polydectes still ruled, still smiled arrogantly, still feigned nobility, while he plotted in the shadows. Perseus knew he could not leave this as it was, not for revenge, but for justice. The next morning, he went to the palace, this time without hiding his face. He entered through the main doors, wearing his dirty traveling armor. He carried his bag on his shoulder. His face was firm, his eyes calm. The hall was full. Polydectes was giving another of his theatrical receptions. He laughed, feigning generosity, surrounded by the same men who had mocked him. When he saw Perseus, he froze. His laughter disappeared. He tried to regain control, but the room had already stopped. Everyone was watching. Perseus walked to the center. He spoke little. He said that he had fulfilled his promise, that he had brought the gift that the king had demanded. No one believed him. They laughed. Some mocked. Others became tense. It was then that he opened the bag. For a brief second, Medusa's eyes met the faces in the hall, and everything went silent. One by one, the bodies stiffened. Clothes, expressions, movements, everything was petrified. The king was the last. The statue held the same pose as when it had tried to flee. Perseus put his head away again. Silence. An emptiness spread across the hall. There was no more threat. No more adversaries, just stone. There was no celebration, no speeches, just a strange sense of incomplete justice. Polydectes had gotten the end he deserved, but the taste of victory was dry. Perseus didn't feel better, just free. Dictys took over the government of the island, a just man, as he had always been. Things began to settle down, slowly. Danae could finally walk without fear, but Perseus did not stay. He could not. The peace of the island no longer suited him. Now that everything was settled, he felt out of place. It was as if he had left part of himself along the way. In Medusa's eyes, in the stones of the lair. He left. Again. Not on a mission, but out of necessity. He took with him the Gorgon's head, kept as a symbol of something greater. Not of power, but of memory. The return had been made, but the real return, the one that happens inside, was still far away. The return journey no longer followed the previous route. Perseus was in no hurry, nor did he have a fixed destination. He continued on, like someone who needed distance between what had been done and what was now. He crossed different lands, rough seas, villages that barely knew his name. He carried Athena's shield, Hermes' sandals, Hades' helmet, and inside the enchanted bag, the trophy that no one dared to imagine. On one of these stops, he encountered something that was not part of the plan, a change of direction that like most things in ancient stories, came about by chance or by fate, depending on who tells the story. It was on a cliff by the sea, a high rock cut by violent waves. The sky was cloudy, and the wind was heavy with salt. In the distance, Perseus saw a figure, something motionless, not a stone, nor a sculpture, something that looked human. He approached, carefully, as he always did. What he saw froze him for a moment. She was a young woman, chained to the stone, her arms stretched out, her wrists bound with bronze rings, her dress torn by the wind, her gaze fixed on the horizon. There was dignity in the way she faced the weight. She didn't scream. She didn't even cry. She just looked at him, serene, as if his presence was a variation of the wind. Perseus, still silent, landed. He took off his helmet. He asked her name, Andromeda. The story came out in fragments. She was the daughter of the king of Ethiopia. Her mother, Cassiopeia, had boasted of her daughter's beauty. She said that Andromeda was more beautiful than the Nereids, daughters of the sea, words spoken to the wind, but which reached the ears of the gods. Poseidon, offended, sent a sea monster to destroy the coast. The only solution, given by an oracle, was a sacrifice. Andromeda would be left there, trapped, waiting for the monster. The young woman's beauty, as so often in mythology, had become punishment, a gift turned into a sentence. She had chosen nothing, but she bore the burden of everything. Perseus listened, silent. He looked at the sea. The waves were getting bigger, the water was getting darker. Something was moving beneath the surface. A dull roar came from the depths. The monster was getting closer. Perseus did not ask permission. He did not consult anyone. He simply decided. He ascended to the sky with his winged sandals. He took up his shield. Medusa's head still slept in the bag. He waited. The monster surged forward, parting the waters like blades. It was huge, covered in scales. It had slit eyes and wide jaws. Andromeda remained trapped, motionless. Perseus flew to the right spot. At the exact moment, he removed the Gorgon's head. He pointed her face at the monster. The effect was immediate. The creature's body stiffened in the air. Its muscles seized, its skin lost its shine, and finally, the monster sank, turned to stone. The sea calmed down, the wind stopped. Perseus landed again. He carefully cut Andromeda's chains. She staggered, but did not fall. She looked at him, as if trying to understand if everything was real. That night, the two of them didn't say much. They camped under the clear sky. They slept close together, but in silence, not out of distance, but out of respect. Andromeda was not fragile. She was just a person, exhausted by bearing the consequences of other people's words. Perseus understood her. He had also been dragged down by the promises of others. He had also fought for something he did not choose. The next morning, she asked to go with him. She didn't want to go back. Perseus didn't question it. He just accepted. Two figures, both marked by destiny, now walked together. Perseus returned to the island of Seriphos, with Andromeda at his side. They had both come from different battles, but they carried the same weariness in their eyes. They were not seeking honors, nor did they expect celebration. They simply wanted to close what had been left open. The island approached on the horizon, like a familiar place, but no longer familiar. Since he had left, Perseus had changed. And now, even landing in the land where he had grown up, he felt that he no longer belonged there. Their arrival was discreet. Few saw them. Many still believed he was dead, that the mission was impossible. The rumor that he had been swallowed by his own pride had spread quickly, but the truth, as almost always, was stranger than the legend. Danae was alive, but isolated. Polydectes, with his heir out of the picture, had taken control of everything. He ruled with a feigned sense of balance, while tightening the limits of the population. He did not call himself a tyrant, but he acted with cold authority. Perseus wasted no time. He did not seek explanations or request an audience. He walked straight into the main hall of the palace, with Andromeda at his side and his bag over his shoulder. The king's men tried to stop him. They hesitated when they saw his face. They still recognized him, but they did not know what to expect. Polydectes was on the throne, surrounded by advisors, courtiers, and flatterers. His pose was the same. His smile was polite, but his eyes were trembling. He tried to keep control. He tried to laugh, to say he was surprised, relieved at the return. He made broad gestures. As always, he tried to turn the threat into theater. Perseus didn't answer. He just walked to the center of the room. His voice was calm, unhurried. He said he had kept his promise, that he had brought the requested gift. No one believed him, until he opened his bag. In a second, everything changed. Medusa's head, even lifeless, still bore her gaze, a fixed, ancient, inevitable glow. Her eyes met Polydectes, with those of the men around her, and the hall fell silent. One by one, the bodies stiffened, faces frozen in fright, hands still clutching glasses, tongues still trying to form excuses. The scene turned to stone. Perseus put his head away. He closed his bag. The air grew heavy, no sound, except the wind coming through the window. Andromeda watched everything in silence. Danae arrived shortly after. She saw what was left. She said nothing. She just took a deep breath, as if recognizing the end of a cycle. With the king dead, the island was left without rule. Perseus did not want the throne. He did not want to rule. He only wanted to ensure that no one else used their power to oppress. He appointed Dictys as regent. The old fisherman accepted, reluctantly, but with dignity. He was an honest man, and even without ambition, he accepted his duty. The people reacted cautiously. Relief and fear mixed together. They didn't know how to deal with a real hero who walked among them without shining armor, but with a firm gaze. Perseus, after a few days, announced his departure. There was no longer any reason to stay. Seriphos was his starting point, not his final destination. Andromeda would accompany him. Danae, for the first time in a long time, chose to stay, not out of fear, but out of freedom. The real world, the one that existed beyond the islands and the legends, still awaited them, with its own rules, with more dangerous kings, and with challenges that could not be solved with swords or magic heads. But Perseus didn't just carry the weapon. He carried what he had learned, that heroism often hides in silence, in the refusal to repeat the cycle, in the simple act of not becoming the monster you fight. Perseus left Seriphos as if he were saying goodbye to an old version of himself. The island, with its narrow streets and salty wind, was now a thing of the past. He set off with Andromeda, unhurriedly, but with direction. The way was Argos. There lived Acrisius, the grandfather who had tried to prevent him from being born, the man who had heard a prophecy and, out of fear, had thrown mother and son into the sea. Acrisius still ruled, old, but resilient, cautious, but still feared. Since his youth, he had carried the same worry, being killed by his grandson. The prediction would not leave him in peace. It never had. That was why he exiled Danae. That was why he ignored reason. Now, his grandson was returning. Perseus wasn't angry. He wasn't seeking revenge, but he wasn't seeking reconciliation either. He just felt he needed to see this man, to face the beginning of his story, to see in his grandfather's eyes the fear that had shaped his entire life. The journey to Argos was silent. Andromeda spoke little. She also carried her own ghosts. Perseus thought of Danae. He thought of the sea. He thought of his childhood, which could have been different. But above all, he thought of the inevitability of things. Upon arrival, he was not received with pomp nor resistance. Acrisius, upon learning of his grandson's approach, did not arm himself. He did not prepare soldiers. He simply left. He left the city without warning, disguised among the people. He fled not out of cowardice, but out of desperation. He was trying, once again, to escape his fate. Perseus heard about the escape and did not react with surprise. He walked around the city, talked to the residents. He said he had not come to take the throne, nor to seek justice. He just wanted his grandfather to know he was alive and he was not an enemy. A few days later, he would participate in a festival in another city, athletic games, in honor of the gods. It was a public celebration, a moment of rest, and also a reunion with life outside the legends. Perseus signed up for one of the events, the discus throw. The crowd was large. Among the faces, none were familiar, or almost none. Among the spectators, hidden, Acrisius watched, curious, tired, perhaps seeking confirmation that his grandson was real. Perseus threw the discus, a steady, calculated move, but the discus went off course. It went too far, too fast. It flew through the space between the competitors and the spectators, and it struck a man. The crowd stopped, screams, running. The fallen man was Acrisius. No one knew at the time, not even Perseus. The old king died at the instant of impact. There was no crime. There was no guilt. Just destiny, fulfilled. The prophecy, fulfilled. In the least expected way. No hatred, no confrontation, just accident. Perseus stood still, staring at the body. He didn't cry. He didn't defend himself. He accepted it, as if deep down, he had always known it would be this way. The people murmured. Some were afraid. Others said that the fate of kings is always written by greater forces. Perseus, for his part, simply withdrew. He did not want the throne of Argos. He gave it to another, a local man, an honest man. For him, governing was never an objective. He carried too many scars to desire power. He just wanted to move forward and let the world reorganize itself without him at the center. Grandfather's death did not bring satisfaction. It brought silence, a confirmation that sometimes fate acts when no one is looking. Perseus moved on, but something inside him remained still. His grandfather's death, even if involuntary, sealed a cycle he never asked to begin. Since birth, his choices had been shaped by the decisions of others. First the prophecy, then the fear of Acrisius, then the challenge of Polydectes, Medusa, Andromeda. It all seemed to have happened to him, never by him. He walked through cities he didn't know, through fields without a name. People recognized him sometimes, whispered. They called him a hero, a monster slayer, a son of Zeus. But these words sounded hollow to him. What was a choice after all? At what point did he truly decide something freely? He thought about it at night, when the world slept and the silence became dense. Since he was a child, he had lived under the weight of other people's decisions. He grew up isolated because of the fear of a king. He was sent to his death because of another's vanity. He received weapons from the gods, but without knowing the rules of the game. Even when he saved Andromeda, he was reacting to the absurd. There was no time to reflect. There was no real option, only urgency, the impulse to do what was right, even without knowing why. Now, free from kings, monsters, and prophecies, he found himself faced with his own will, and he didn't know what to do with it. Freedom, he realized, is more confusing than duty. When you are bound by a destiny, there is at least one direction. When you are free, anything is possible, and therefore, everything is uncertain. Andromeda watched him, but did not interfere. She also knew what it felt like to be used as a piece on a board she did not understand. She grew up as a symbol of beauty, then it was a sacrifice. Now she was a free woman, and she was slowly discovering that this also requires strength. Perseus spoke little, but he thought intensely. He began to understand that even when he believed he was making decisions, he was often just reacting to what the world imposed. Choice, for him, was always an answer, never a beginning. Athena's shield, the sword, the helmet, the head in the bag, all received, all imposed. He used each item with precision, but he never chose the role it played. It had been useful, admired, but never really listened to. In mythology, heroes rarely have room for doubt. They slay monsters, win battles, and return glorious. But outside of verse and song, there is the weight of doubt, and Perseus now carried that weight. He wondered what would have happened if he had refused the mission, if he had said no to the king, if he had refused to be the hero that others wanted. But these questions had no answers. The truth is that in that world, refusing was also a risk. A young man without political protection, surrounded by powerful figures. Saying no was almost always a slow way to be eliminated. Maybe the illusion of choice was the only possible path, pretending to decide, going with the flow, surviving. Now, with time slowing down and the road empty, Perseus began to want something else. No more glory, no more approval. He wanted silence, a place without judging eyes, without voices telling him what to do. Andromeda understood. That's why she accompanied him, without asking for directions. They walked together, but without a fixed destination. They were two survivors who were still learning to exist, away from the chaos. Perseus knew he would never be completely free of his past, but perhaps he could learn to move, without repeating the same patterns, without accepting missions disguised as honor, without serving desires that were not his own. That, he now understood, was the only real choice left to him. Perseus's name had spread. Even though he had no desire for fame, it reached him. In every city they passed, stories arose. Some true, some distorted. They said he had conquered death, defeated monsters, defied kings, and rescued a princess. They said he was the son of Zeus, protected by the gods. They said that wherever he went, evil dissolved, but no one asked how he was. Being a hero, he realized, was less about what he did, and more about what was expected of him. There was no room for silence, for doubt, for weariness. The hero had to always appear whole, strong, inspiring. Perseus didn't feel that way. He saw himself in reflections of water and did not recognize the image. There were marks on his face that were not there before. His features were harder, his eyes were deeper. His body was still agile, but the weight he carried was different. It was not physical, it was made of memories, demands, and responsibilities not asked for. Wherever he went, people asked him to solve problems, to kill wild animals, to judge disputes. He, who only wanted to rest, found himself involved in demands that were not his, not out of direct obligation, but because of the gaze of others. People's gaze was heavy. They carried hope, fear, and admiration in silence, but they projected onto him the idea of someone perfect, a symbol. Perseus didn't know how to refuse. Every time she said, "I can't," or "I don't know," she saw the disappointment on their faces, as if the hero was failing just by admitting his limits. And that hurt more than any battle wound. I didn't want to disappoint, but I also didn't want to lie. The stories told about him grew with time. Each feat gained new details. Medusa became bigger, Polydectes more cruel, Andromeda more fragile. He more invincible. None of this was accurate. And the more the legend grew, the more distant Perseus felt from himself. It was like watching someone else live in his place. Another Perseus, created by the words of others, one who felt no fear, one who always knew what to do, one who never doubted. Andromeda noticed. She watched the growing discomfort. She tried to protect him, sometimes diverting conversations, declining invitations on his behalf, creating small refuges. But even so, the world caught up with them. Once, when they stopped in a small town, an old man came and knelt before Perseus. He begged for help in driving out a creature that was threatening the village. Perseus looked at the man, at his eyes wet with faith, and could not say no. But when he faced the monster, a small, wild, but clearly frightened beast, he realized something. There was no real malice there. It was an animal, just trying to survive. He drove it away without killing it, and he came back angry with himself, not because of the choice to save, but because he let himself be pressured. The weight of expectations was like a veil over her eyes. It made her forget who she was before fame. He began to avoid big cities. He preferred isolated trails, discreet villages. The sound of the rivers was more comforting than the sound of requests. Perseus wanted, for the first time, not to have to prove anything, not to anyone, not even to himself. Perhaps this was the biggest challenge of all. Andromeda walked silently beside Perseus. She too had become a symbol, not because of her deeds, but because of her appearance. Her story was known, though told incompletely. The princess in chains, the maiden saved by the hero, the handsome reward. But Andromeda was not a reward, nor an object of ransom. She was someone with desires, pains, thoughts of her own, and she was tired. Beauty had shaped her life from an early age. As a child, she was praised excessively, compared to goddesses, pointed out at parties and in the squares. Over time, she realized that words came before any question about who she was. Then came the risks. Men who didn't know how to hear no, looks that invaded without touching, sweet words with heavy intentions. And then, the curse. The vanity of her mother, Cassiopeia, became a sentence. Andromeda, without saying anything, was condemned to die for something she did not say. Chained to a rock as payment for an offense she did not commit. She spent hours there, trapped, the sea at her feet, the sky above, fear as her companion. But she didn't cry. She knew that crying wouldn't save her. When Perseus appeared, she was not impressed. She was ready for the end. His help was unexpected. His gesture was decisive, but she never saw him as a savior. She saw him as someone who recognized her humanity. Now, they traveled together, and even far from the chains, Andromeda still felt the weight of what the world saw in her. In each city, the looks were repeated. The same wonder, the same silence, the same expectation. People called her beautiful before even asking her name. They assumed sweetness, obedience, fragility. Andromeda, however, was firm. She walked with light but sure steps. She observed more than she spoke. She made decisions without making a fuss. She was strong, but in a quiet way. Perseus saw this and respected it. He never treated her as a trophy, nor as a shadow. Sometimes on clear nights, she would tell stories. She would talk about her childhood, about playing in the gardens, about closed windows. She would talk about how she felt she was just an image, a face, a body, rarely a voice. I once said that beauty can be a prison, that there are places where it opens doors, but in most cases, it just changes the shape of the cell. Perseus listened. He did not respond with advice. He just listened. She knew that the world placed expectations on her, just as it did on him. Only, while they expected strength and glory from him, they expected quiet perfection from her. They were two sides of the same trap. The love between them grew slowly, not through grand gestures, but through presence, by respecting each other's space, by accepting that saving each other wasn't always necessary. Sometimes it was enough to walk together. Andromeda bore her scars, invisible but deep, and she learned, little by little, that she didn't have to live up to expectations. She was not a symbol. She was a woman, and she was determined never to be chained again, not even with words. The world would remember Perseus for his battles, his impossible feats, his stories told around the fire. They would say he was the one who defeated Medusa, who saved Andromeda, who overthrew an unjust king. But few voices would mention what happened next. The silent days, the small gestures, the choices that no one applauded. Perseus gradually discovered that true heroism does not always require a sword, nor brilliance, nor witnesses. Often, it only requires presence, or the decision not to repeat a mistake. He saw it in his own steps when he chose not to get involved in conflicts that didn't require bloodshed, when he listened instead of talking, when he let others decide their own fate. These decisions did not win corners, but they weighed more than combats. Athena's shield, slung across her back, was no longer used. Medusa's head, still kept, was avoided. Her helmet and sandals remained hidden, wrapped in cloth, as if the time of confrontation had passed. Now, the challenge was different: to remain honest in a world that preferred simplified versions, where heroes are expected to solve everything, where doubts are seen as weakness. Perseus carried his doubts as part of himself. He no longer tried to hide them. He understood that courage is not the absence of fear, but rather moving forward in spite of it. In a forgotten village, he found a widowed woman with 2 children. Her husband had died in a storm at sea. No one helped. The people respected Perseus, but they expected him to move on. He didn't leave. He stayed. He fixed the roof of the house. He brought food. He helped in the fields. Without saying who he was, without using any power, there, for a week, he was just a man. And that, he discovered, was enough. Andromeda followed him, watching. She knew there was something special about someone who could do so much, but chose the simple. Quiet heroism, she realized, was rarer than any magic sword. It was made of daily choices, of kindness when no one was watching. Perseus never explained why he did it, but she understood. He was trying to relearn the world, to figure out where to fit in a life that wasn't just legend. In another village, an old blind man asked him to cure his sight. They said he had the touch of the gods. Perseus replied that he was not a god and that he could not promise miracles. He left without doing anything, but he came back in the evening and sat with the old man. He listened to his stories. He laughed at his jokes. He shared food. The man said in the end that he could see better now. This kind of gesture would never enter the official record, but it was, perhaps, the truest. Perseus learned that strength is not in the impact of a blow, but in the care with which one steps on fragile ground. Being a hero, he realized, is not about defeating monsters. It is about not becoming one. Perseus rarely thought about the gods. He did not invoke them. He did not thank them. He only remembered them, as if they were figures who had passed through his life briefly, leaving valuable gifts, but also uncomfortable questions. They had appeared at just the right moment. Hermes, with his sandals and soft words. Athena, with her shield and cold gaze. They gave him tools. They said little. They left quickly. They have not returned since. Was it enough? Perhaps. But Perseus, over time, began to question. The gods helped him. But why? Out of interest? Out of boredom? Out of whim? They never said. They never explained. They just acted. On the surface, they seemed benevolent. but there was something in their gestures that suggested distance, like someone offering a toy to see what happens. He had been chosen, not by merit, but by opportunity. He was useful, and the gods, when they find someone useful, act, not out of empathy, but out of convenience. The head of Medusa, still preserved, was a direct result of divine intervention. The mission was only possible because the gods provided the tools, but they were also the ones who created the setting. Athena turned Medusa into a monster. Zeus visited Danae. Poseidon punished Andromeda. Every step of the story was shrouded in divine action. Perseus now saw more clearly. The gods shaped the game, but they did not play. They watched, they interfered, then they disappeared. The good they did always came with a shadow, an invisible cost. The help was real, but never free. When Perseus saved Andromeda, he felt he was acting on his own, but he knew the monster had been sent by Poseidon, and the oracle, who demanded the sacrifice, spoke in the name of the gods. Everything revolved around them, but they were never at the center. Perseus wondered if he had ever been free, or if he had always been dragged along like a piece, pushed from one place to another. Some nights he thought of Athena, of her calm but impersonal gaze. She had given him a shield, but she hadn't explained why. There was no dialogue, only direction. Andromeda listened to his thoughts without interrupting. She too had been used, shaped by her mother's vanity and the cruel response of the gods. They both knew. Being noticed by a god is not always a blessing. In one village, a priest tried to convince them to offer sacrifices in the name of Athena, in gratitude for the victory over Medusa. Perseus refused. He said he did not feel he owed her anything. The priest was offended. He said that the gods did not tolerate ingratitude, but Perseus did not answer. I had already understood. The gods did not care about worship. They cared about usefulness. And now that he was no longer useful, they were silent. The world went on. Men prayed. Statues shone, but the gods watched from a distance. And with that, Perseus learned to walk with his feet on the ground. Perseus's success was undeniable. He had defeated Medusa, saved Andromeda, defeated Polydectes, fulfilled the prophecy, and yet he carried a weight that would not diminish. It was the kind of tiredness that came not from the body, but from within. An exhaustion that grew silently, even on calm days. Fame preceded him. People bowed down when they saw him. They told his stories with exaggeration, exaggerating his deeds, creating more heroic versions of what he remembered. They said he never hesitated, that he never made a mistake, that he was the perfect example of courage. But Perseus knew the truth. He knew what he had felt when he entered Medusa's cave. He knew the doubt, the guilt, the silence that had followed him for days. He knew there was no pure glory in victory. Every achievement left a scar, not visible, but present. The world didn't teach us how to deal with what comes after. It taught us how to win, how to survive, but never resting, never carrying what remains. Andromeda noticed. Sometimes she saw Perseus waking up at night, eyes open in the dark, not from nightmares, but from persistent memories. The sound of blood on the floor, the look of frozen statues, the surprise on petrified faces. Winning, he discovered, doesn't solve everything. Sometimes it leaves a void. After everything is over, there is silence, and in that silence, questions arise. Was it worth it? Was it really necessary? Could I have done it differently? But nobody wants to hear these doubts. They expect the hero to move on, to smile, to be grateful, and Perseus tried, but inside, he felt the pressure, as if he couldn't fail anymore, as if the first fall would be enough to erase everything. Success, which was supposed to free him, kept him trapped. Now, every action was watched. Every choice was judged, the margin for error was gone. He began to distance himself from the crowds. He refused invitations, he avoided the centers. He sought out simple places where no one expected anything, where he could simply exist. In a fishing village, he spent weeks without mentioning his name. He was just a traveler, an ordinary man, and there, for the first time, he slept in peace. But even in these refuges, success followed him. Someone always recognized the shield or the name, and the cycle began again. It wasn't shame, it was exhaustion. Perseus never asked to be an example. He just wanted to live without having to prove something at every step. The greatest trauma of success, he understood, was the loss of the freedom to fail. Wherever he went, Perseus was recognized. There was admiration in the eyes, but also a silent distance. People respected him, but they never really got close. It was as if they saw him more as a symbol than as a man, and this, over time, left him increasingly alone. The hero's solitude was not made up of physical absence. There was always someone nearby. A wave, a request, a question, but something else was missing. A space where he could be seen without the weight of expectations, where he could exist without having to sustain the image they created for him. Andromeda was an exception. She knew his silence. She knew when not to ask questions, when to just sit by his side and let time pass. But even between them, there were moments of distance. Because Perseus, even by her side, sometimes disappeared into himself. Loneliness set in during the pauses, when the deeds were done, when the routes were quiet, when no one called his name. It was in these moments that emptiness emerged. A feeling of no longer belonging anywhere, not to his homeland, nor to the legends that had been created about him. It was a strange feeling to be surrounded by recognition, and yet feel invisible in what was most intimate. Perseus didn't complain. He had never been much of a talker, but inside him, something weighed heavily. He had become a point of reference. They expected him to know what to do, to make the right decisions, to face anything, but he didn't always know. He didn't always want to, and saying it out loud seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. Once, they stopped in a village where there was a temple dedicated to him. Statues, candles, inscriptions, men and women came to thank him. They asked for protection, advice. They told of miracles that had happened in his name. Perseus listened to everything in silence. He didn't correct it. He didn't deny it, but when he left, he told Andromeda that it wasn't his, that the Perseus from the stories hadn't been him for a long time, that perhaps he had never been. To be a hero, he realized, was to live between memory and invention. What people remember is not what he lived. It is what they need to believe, and that isolated him. He wasn't looking for comfort or redemption, just a place where he could just be someone, a tired man with a past and doubts, with wounds that don't heal just because he won a battle. The hero's loneliness is made of this, of not having a place to rest without defenses, of not being able to make mistakes in peace, of not being remembered as human. And perhaps that is why Perseus kept moving forward, always further away, searching, without knowing it, for a place where he could stop and be forgotten, where he could finally stop being a hero. Death has always been present in Perseus' life, not as an enemy, but as a constant shadow. Since birth, he lived under the threat of an early end, first at sea, when he was cast adrift with his mother, then in the mission against Medusa, later in the confrontation with Polydectes, finally in the accidental death of his own grandfather. But now, with time moving slower and his steps less urgent, Perseus began to see death differently, not as something to be overcome, but as a natural part of all life. He did not fear death, He had seen too much for that. He understood that life was a thin thread, and that the end came, sooner or later, with or without warning. In the villages he passed through, he often helped with rituals of passage. He carried bodies. He tended bonfires. He talked to those who were left behind. He never placed himself above the moment. He was not the hero there. He was just one among many who knew the weight of loss. In a small village, an old fisherman who recognized him died during the winter. Perseus stayed for the burial. He didn't speak. He just helped cover the body with earth like everyone else. Then he sat down next to his family and remained there until the fire went out. That's when he realized there was another kind of courage, not the kind that faces monsters, but the kind that looks death in the face without trying to deny it. All his life he had been driven by the idea of survival. Kill or be killed. Win or perish. But now he saw that death was not defeat. It was return. It was rest. It was release. He thought of Medusa, not as an enemy, but as a being condemned, a creature created by the cruelty of the gods, used as an obstacle, discarded as a threat. He remembered the moment he had cut off her head. There was no hatred. There was only need, and that marked him. Medusa was also part of the cycle, just like Acrisius, just like Polydectes, just like him. Even legends grow old, and one day they are forgotten. Perseus did not seek eternity. He knew that the songs of bards do not last forever, that statues break, that names lose strength, and that, strangely, comforted him. Death was not the end of everything. It was the end of one form, and perhaps the beginning of another. He didn't know when his would come, or where, but he knew he wouldn't run away from it. Maybe it was closer than I thought, but now for the first time, he was ready to receive her without a fight. Perseus walked slowly along a road without haste. Beside him, Andromeda walked in silence. The sky was clear, and the wind blew lightly. It was one of those days when nothing seemed urgent, and perhaps because of that, he thought more clearly. All his life he had heard that he had won. Defeated monsters, defeated kings, defeated destiny. But now, with his feet on solid ground and the past behind him, the word win seemed strange. What is winning after all? To be acclaimed? To be remembered? To defeat enemies? Perseus had all of this in parts, but none of it seemed enough. He had killed Medusa. Yes, he still dreamed of the eyes he had never seen directly. He could still smell the blood. He could still hear the silence that followed the blow. He had overthrown Polydectes, but not without turning men to stone, people who had mocked him. It was true, but perhaps they were only laughing out of habit. Had there been another way? He would never know. He had saved Andromeda, but not out of a desire for glory. He had acted quickly, as always, on instinct, on impulse, and yet, even that was called a victory. Grandfather died by accident. A disc dropped in a game. A prophecy fulfilled without intention. Still, they said he had beaten destiny. But inside him, there was no sense of achievement, just a cautious relief. He realized that winning, in the words of others, was always about defeating someone, as if there was only value when the other person lost, as if success depended on someone else's downfall. But he didn't feel that way. He didn't feel pleasure in seeing his enemies fall. He felt more the weight of having faced them. Perhaps, I thought now, winning was something else. Winning, perhaps, would be to keep walking, even when no one is watching, choosing kindness over force, admitting doubts, recognizing fears. Maybe winning was simply not repeating what they did to him. Do not turn others into instruments. Do not use force as an ego shield. Do not pretend to be certain where there is uncertainty. Perseus now avoided conflict, not out of fear, but out of weariness. I preferred to listen before I acted. I preferred silence to judgment. I preferred pause to impulse. And perhaps that would be the greatest victory. Andromeda said one night that she never saw him as a savior. She saw a man who chose to act when he could have turned his back. And that, to her, was more valuable than any legend. The word hero never felt natural to him. It was a heavy title, full of demands. He didn't want to be a symbol. He just wanted to live in peace. In the solitude of the paths, he understood that winning did not mean being invincible. It meant moving forward with dignity, even when wounded. And that he could do. The stories of Perseus continued to circulate in squares, in taverns, in temples, but always with exaggerated brilliance. They tell of the hero who cut off Medusa's head, who flew with divine sandals, who saved a princess from a sea monster. The myth grew, but the truth became increasingly distant. What no one saw was what happened between the deeds, the long path between one choice and another, the doubts that crossed him in the silence of the night, the fears that he did not confess even to himself. The myth does not mention sore feet after days of walking, nor the pain in his shoulders from carrying a bag that held something heavier than a rock. It does not mention the moments when he looked up at the sky and asked without words why all this had happened to him. It doesn't count the days when I didn't want to go on anymore, when I felt I had done enough, but the world still expected more. This was the hidden beauty of the myth. What no one sang, what no one applauded, what did not become a statue. The beauty of someone who continued even without an audience, who helped a villager carry water, who sat next to a stranger to listen to their pain, who went unnoticed on purpose so he could live in peace for a few days. The myth was made of swords and monsters, but reality was made of silence, of small choices, of hidden fatigue. Perseus realized this. Over time he learned not to let it bother him. He let the myth run wild while he sought something else. Not recognition, but rest. Andromeda saw this quest and admired it, not for his heroic gestures, but for his stillness, for the way he cared for others, without making a spectacle of it, for the way he accepted being just one more, when he could demand to be treated like a legend. The beauty of the myth that no one saw was there, in the care with which he touched the earth, in the respect for each name he heard, in the silence he offered to those who needed to be heard. Perseus had no need of statues. He had already become too much stone inside. Now, I just wanted to be the wind, to pass by lightly, to leave less weight behind. And that was the part of the story that would never be told out loud, but it was, perhaps, the truest. Time passed, and with it, the world changed. New kings took throne. New names appeared in stories. Other monsters appeared, different, perhaps less threatening, perhaps more so. People spoke less of Perseus, not out of disrespect, but because human memory is in a hurry. He realized this, and he didn't take offense. In fact, he was relieved to see his own name slowly disappear. The world no longer needed him, and that was a lighter truth than one might imagine. They no longer asked for his sword, nor for his presence at assemblies. They no longer came to him to settle disputes or ward off threats. The problems had changed shape. The struggles had become different, and for them, he was no longer useful. There was a time when he would have felt lost, when the lack of purpose felt like emptiness. But now, it was different. The silence wasn't absence, it was freedom. Perseus did not withdraw into sadness, but into observation. He began to walk less. He spent more time in the same places. He listened to other people's stories more attentively. Andromeda had also changed. She walked more calmly. She planted flowers. She read the winds. The two exchanged few words, but they knew what the other felt. They lived as if they understood that they had already done what they needed to do, that the world moves on, and that this is good. Some children still came to ask if it was true, if he had really defeated Medusa. He smiled. He said yes, but that it had happened a long time ago. Then I would go back to tending the garden, because the world no longer needed him, and that didn't make him any lesser. The hero who is no longer needed is still someone who lives, who observes, who remembers, and sometimes forgets. Perseus finally understood that being a hero is not eternal, and that it's okay to just be a man. Time slowed down. The days began to resemble one another, and that was a gift. After so many twists and turns, so many demands, Perseus found comfort in repetition. The simple routine was not boredom, it was rest. In the morning, he woke up early. He tended the soil. He talked to the villagers when he felt like it. He watched Andromeda among the trees, tending the plants with calm gestures. They didn't talk about the past often. It was there, of course, but it no longer dominated the present. The objects of his legend were stored away. The sword, the shield, the helmet, all clean but dormant. Medusa's head, sealed, buried in a safe place. Not as treasure, not as a threat, just as a keepsake. Sometimes at night, Perseus would lie under the open sky and gaze at the stars. Some bore ancient names. There were constellations dedicated to him. Others to Andromeda. The world above, fixed and yet in constant motion, seemed to reflect the same truth he now held. Everything changes. Everything returns. There was no more rush, no more ambition. Instead, there was a calm acceptance, the knowledge that not every life has to be grand, that not every ending needs fanfare. The story of Perseus does not end with a battle. It ends with a man sitting on the edge of a field, watching the wind blow through the leaves. The hero dissolved into time. He left space for the human. And that, perhaps, was his greatest achievement. Being remembered will one day be optional, but having lived honestly, no one can take that away. Perhaps, somewhere in the world, someone still asks, would you survive Medusa? But now, the answer matters less than the question, because what makes a story beautiful is not the ending, it's the way, it's the break, it's silence after all. Good evening, traveler. May your dreams be light, and that tomorrow, the world doesn't demand that you be more than just you.